That's right. Bear down, Bears fans. It's time for another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast, Bears Banter, powered by Second City Gridiron. Bill Zimmerman with you, and we are coming at you after a 4-game winning streak with the possibility of a 5th game in the win column if the Bears can beat the Baltimore Ravens this week. And we don't know the status of Lamar Jackson. I think we all assumed he was coming back this week, but now we're getting some reports that maybe he needs one more week. That's going to be interesting. We'll talk about that towards the end of the podcast. But for now, let's talk about this win over the New Orleans Saints. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty at times, but it was efficient enough, and the Bears kind of won this the old-fashioned way. This was like 1988 Chicago Bears, where they're going to run the snot out of the football and beat you defensively, and that's what this game was. And I wrote about it earlier this week on Windy City Gridiron, about how close it feels like you're starting to see all the pieces of the puzzle. And you just got it. It's like they're just trying to get figured out and laying them out and putting them in the right spot. Like, we've seen Caleb Williams dominate, right? We saw him dominate against Dallas. We saw a great performance late in the game against Las Vegas. We saw what we needed to see at times from Caleb Williams. We've seen this defense now really starting to come together in Dennis Allen's vision about what, like, his press defense, his aggressive defense, what he likes to do. I mean, we saw it on display against the New Orleans Saints. We're going to talk about the defense in a little more detail here, but we've seen that, right? We have seen this run game now come together like it can with DeAndre Swift and this offensive line. We have seen that. We have seen all these different pieces come together, but we haven't seen them all come together on the same day. And when we do, and I guess I should say if we do, but I feel it's a when we do, that's when we do. And not just when it happens, but if it starts happening consistently, that's when you know this team has arrived in terms of being a legitimate playoff contender. They're not there yet. I understand they've won 4 straight, and we should be excited that this team has won 4 straight games, but there's still, Caleb Williams the last couple of weeks has been off, but the running game has carried the situation. The defense against the Saints, I understand a little bit of a glitch there, end of the first half, beginning of the second half, but the other 55 minutes of football, this defense was amazing. So we're seeing all of it. We just need to see it come together at the same time, and we're going to see if that happens here in the near future. I still think it's going to take a little while because there's still a lot of things they're ironing out. There's still things that Ben Johnson, I think, is figuring out on how to best utilize this offense, how to utilize everyone in the passing attack, how to marry the offense and the defense, making sure some of these mistakes are getting cleaned up. There's still stuff that needs to happen. So that stuff still needs to get worked on, but the other pieces, you're starting to see what this can be. And I'll tell you what, let's start with the defense. And let's actually start with the end of the game with the defense, with Dennis Allen, who, of course, has a history with the Saints. He's no longer there. And I know for the most part that coaches and all, they're always going to keep it buttoned up. But deep down inside, that it matters, that they want to show like, hey, you made a mistake. Like, everyone has it. That's just human nature. So when we see that happen, what we saw in the locker room after the game with Ben Johnson, giving the game ball to Dennis Allen, recognizing that this mattered for Dennis Allen, seeing Dennis Allen celebrate with his players, showing his players that Ben Johnson is correct. Yes, this game did matter. There was a little extra juice in this game for me. Like, that matters, that the coaches recognize it, that the players recognize it, that they all celebrate together with a hell yeah, coach. We brought it today. We brought it today for the Bears, but we brought it today for you too. Like, that matters. And that culture, we have talked about it a lot the last couple of weeks. That culture is being built at Hallis Hall, that winning culture that everyone's wanted to see for years, that culture change and it become that winning culture instead of that loser mentality that has been at Hallis Hall for years. I mean, for the most part, other than, 2018, 4 years, we have seen 15 years of loser mentality at Hallis Hall. And it doesn't get changed on a dime like that. It takes months and months. And we are seeing Ben Johnson going back to OTAs and his attention to detail and not letting things slide and having messaging being consistent and everything he's been doing to try and change that, to try and teach these players how to be winners. Because let's be honest, some of these guys won in college, they won in high school, but just because they won there, it doesn't mean they're going to win at the professional level. It's the best of the best. It's the cream of the crop. It is, you can be basically an all-American quarterback in college. You can throw for 5,000 yards in college. That doesn't mean you're going to be successful at the NFL level. It's a different ball game. It's like the college, there's a wake-up call for the high school player when they get to Division I college. You go, oh my God, the competition is so much better. Then you're taking an even smaller pool of that and putting that at the NFL level. And that pool doesn't even have success. Then there's even a smaller pool that comes out of that initial pool that's actually successful players. It is that elite at the NFL level. And I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but these players, a lot of them, they don't know how to win at that level. They've never done it. That's why getting a guy like Joe Tooney and Grady Jarrett and guys that have been to Super Bowls and know what it should look like to win matters, because even veterans, DJ Moore, has he ever seen a winning team at the NFL level? No. The guys that have been with the Bears the last few years, none of these players on the Bears were here in 2018. They weren't around for that. Cole Kmet and Jalen Johnson, these are the guys that have been around the longest on this team. They haven't seen it. This team loses every year. So the guys that have been around the Bears haven't seen it. Like, you need players that know how to win, that have seen it, that know what it takes. And you need to use those players with Ben Johnson, and he needs to teach these other guys. You need to do those extra reps in the weight room. You need to ask those extra questions in the whiteboard. You need to make sure you bring your iPad home and do that extra video work. You've got to do the things that you need to do to win and not just show up and collect a paycheck. And there's a big difference, and that's a culture changer. And that's what Hallis Hall is needed. And that's what Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen clearly are instilling in this team. So let's get into some of the details of this game, and also let you know that coming up here in maybe about 15 minutes or so is going to be Herron. Anthony Herron, of course, you've probably seen him on the Big Ten Network. You've heard him on 670 The Score. You've heard him and seen him on Fox 32 on their pregame show. Herron, he does a lot of different things. He wears a lot of different hats. I love talking to him. This guy knows ball. He teaches me something every time we talk to him, whether it's off the air or in an interview. So excited to have him on in just a little bit here. But I want to talk about the game here a little bit. And I want to start on the defensive side of the ball, because I loved watching this defense here on Sunday. I loved what I saw from this defense. This defense was exhilarating to watch. This wasn't just the defense is getting some 3-and-outs. The defense isn't allowing a ton of yards. They're clamping down in the red zone and only allowing a field goal. That's not what this was. And that's good defensive play, and that's fine. We've seen plenty of defenses that do that, and they have plenty of success at the NFL level. This defense was flying around. I have watched, and I'm not comparing hits and things like that. We've talked about it if you watch the 85 at 40 series about how different the NFL was 40 years ago in terms of what you were allowed to do in terms of hitting players, hitting quarterbacks and all. So I'm not comparing it to that. But when I say this, I mean this. Watching that defense, it felt like an 85 Bears vibe in terms of the hits they were laying on they hit some players on the Saints hard. You don't see those kind of hits anymore. And they were legal. They were just shoulder right in the square of the numbers and just drill a guy into the turf. They were legal. Some of the sacks, Rattler was rattled for a big part of that game because of the pressure and the hits that he was getting sustained. And it was interesting because, I know Dennis Allen doesn't like blitz constantly like Brian Flores, but he's not afraid to mix it up. And when you see what got home against the Saints, Montez Sweat had a sack, but they got a sack from Tremaine Edmonds and Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon. These guys aren't defensive linemen. They're getting it from blitzes, right? QB hits, the same thing. Sweat had a couple. Dominic Robinson had one or two. And other than that, you saw them coming from Edmonds and Edwards and Gordon and like guys coming from the secondary. You saw Dennis Allen mixing it up. Spencer Rattler did not know where the pressure was coming from half the time. That was an 85 Bears vibe. Those hits were an 85 Bears vibe. The way they attack the football, not the player holding the football swiping at it, pulling it away, the interceptions, the forced fumbles. This was an aggressive defense. Like if you told me, what is the Dennis Allen defense? This is the Dennis Allen defense. This is what we wanted to see, and we hadn't seen it. It's taken a while. And I said this in the podcast in August that I didn't think everything was just going to feel like it just hit the ground running in week one. And I feel like right now, I said it may take a few weeks, it may take a few months. And I feel like right now is where we're starting to see all of this come together. And we saw it on defense. Like we've talked about it. This defense is not going to be able to get pressure just rushing for very often. They don't have the talent and the power, the manpower to do it. Gervon Dexter can do it occasionally. Odengbo might be able to do it once in a while. Grady Jarrett can certainly help if he's playing and he's healthy. Like they've got guys who can do it, but they can't do it cohesively together all the time. And the only way I said that they could do this regularly, getting home with 4, is if Montez Sweat returns to his second half of the season 2023 form. And that is a tall ask because that version of Montez Sweat has not existed at any other point in his career. Not in Washington and not in Chicago. That is the best football he's ever played in his career. But that certainly means it's attainable that he can do it again. He's shown that he can do it. He's not 35 years old. He's 29. He has that still in his muscle memory that he can do that, especially if he's healthy. And what we've seen from Montez Sweat the last 2 weeks is a guy trending in that direction. Is a guy knocking down passes at the line of scrimmage, getting sacks, getting tackles for loss, getting pressure on the quarterback, affecting plays, even if he doesn't get an official statistic. That is the Montez Sweat, where Montez Sweat's presence elevates everyone else around him. And are we going to see this the rest of the season? I sure hope so. I doubt it. I'm sure we're going to have some more lulls, but there is hope that Montez Sweat can be this guy. I mean, I've talked about it on this podcast that if Montez Sweat is the guy from last year and the guy from the first few games of this season, the Bears should try and trade him because he's not worth $25 million. The Montez Sweat from the last 2 weeks, that guy's worth $25 million. So if Montez Sweat is going to start doing this consistently for the rest of the season, then the Bears need to figure out a way how to keep him on the roster. Because if we're being honest, I don't know if you guys have looked at the Bears cap situation for next year, but it's tricky. And I'll talk about this a little bit more when we do the mailbag. I saw there was a lot of stuff in there about the trade deadline, and I don't want the Bears to be very active, spoiler alert, but we'll talk about it in more detail. And we're going to talk about it in some perspective for what they need to do in 2026 as well, because they're in a bit of a complicated situation. So when we are looking at what the Bears can do here, they're not probably going to do a lot at the trade deadline. They need to make things work with the roster that they have. And that means they need guys like Tremaine Edmonds and Montez Sweat who are getting paid, whatever it is, $43 million between the two of them. They need to make sure that they're getting bang for buck out of those guys. Because if they're not, then they're not going to be effective and efficient on the defensive side of the ball. So what we saw was great. And I don't think it's a coincidence that when we see, because, we have no Jalen Johnson, when you see Tremaine Edmonds and Montez Sweat balling like they do, and at that play level, showing that they are worth the money, and we have not seen that much from Tremaine Edmonds the last few years, but are worth the money they're getting paid, When that happens, the defense looks completely different. And I get the Saints stink. And I get that Spencer Rattler, maybe he's a quality backup. He probably should not be a starter. Tyler Shuck, I don't know why he's, you think Rattler's the better version? Okay, fine. Rattler's been decent this year, but he's certainly not some next level quarterback. He's not going to be some diamond in the rough as whatever he was, a 4th, 5th round pick. But the Saints are a bad football team. So the Bears 100% needed to come into this game and beat this team at home by 2 scores. And they did. And it didn't look perfect, but it was good enough, especially with the defense. And I understand the 90-yard drive, mostly because of the Chris Olave big catch that Tyreek Stevenson gave up. And I know Tyreek Stevenson might be hurt here. We'll get some more details about Tyreek Stevenson moving forward. And that sucks because Tyreek Stevenson was turning the corner in terms of the type of football he's playing this season. He's been much better these last few weeks. He's been an excellent defensive back the last few weeks. And yes, he had the big lapse to Chris Olave where Olave Chris Olave is a great player, but Chris Olave got massive separation. Stevenson did a great job getting the shoestring tackle to getting him on the ground. Still resulted in a touchdown, but that's the kind of play that if the Bears defense holds into only 3 points, that's a 4-point tackle from Tyreek Stevenson. That's the kind of plays you need to make. But Tyreek Stevenson is always going to be that kind of player because he is aggressive and he will try and come up on a receiver and play them tight, which may allow them to get past sometimes and get separation on him. But he's going to be a guy that gets passes defended, that he's going to play up in the run, that he's going to hit people. But because of his aggressive playing style, he is going to give up the big play every once in a while. And we saw that against New Orleans. If Stevenson gives up a big play every once in a while, but he's still being sticky in coverage for the most part and making more positive plays than negative plays, then you'll take the big play that Stevenson gives up from time to time. He's not the consistent sticky guy that gets some passes defended, but doesn't get interceptions, doesn't make big plays. It's just kind of there all the time. That's not his game. So you're going to have to, for the big positives, you're going to have to take some big negatives. So I'm not crushing Stevenson for that Olave. I'm just saying that's kind of who he is. So we saw them give up the touchdown end of the first half and beginning of the second half, but we saw them settle back down. I think the rest of the game, they didn't look quite as good as they did the first, whatever it was, 28 minutes of the first half, but they still looked really good. And they made big plays when they had to. And that defense looked outstanding. And the other thing that looked outstanding for the second week in a row is the Ben Johnson rushing attack with this offensive line and with DeAndre Swift. And Sunday, we can even say with Kyle Monangai, because he looked very good as well. And that's where we're seeing this offensive line. You need time to gel. They need to work together. There were a lot of new parts. And with Braxton Jones not being part of this group, 4 new offensive linemen starting across this front 5. The only guy returning is Darnell Wright. And when you have 4 guys, then you may as well have 5 because Darnell Wright's never worked with any of them. So in essence, you have a brand new offensive line. If Darnell Wright and the right guard, at least they would have already had some chemistry from the previous season, but that didn't happen. Jonah Jackson is here now. So you have basically a brand new offensive line because Darnell Wright's never worked with any of them, and it's a brand new blocking and scheme. So Darnell Wright is new to all of this as well. So you're talking about a brand new offensive line that needs to learn their moves and their tendencies and how to play together and how to duo block and how to double team and how to get to the next level at the exact time when to brush off that block and move to level 2. Everything that you have to do to be a cohesive offensive line. The Bears needed to learn how to do that. Maybe at certain times with a certain defensive player, before Jackson can scrape off to the second level, maybe he needs to hold that block for a tick second longer. Or maybe he knows if he could just get this guy, and tick him, not necessarily back, but a little further to the, push him a little further to the side, that Drew Dahlman can take the block the rest of the way and he can scrape off sooner and get to the second level sooner and possibly get a larger hole open for DeAndre Swift. All these things that an offensive line needs to do, they need to learn from each other. It's not just going to happen after you snap your fingers and it happens overnight. It takes a while. And we're seeing that after the bye here, this really coming together. And with the line, the way they're blocking on the run scheme, you're seeing a brand new DeAndre Swift. You are seeing a guy that we have not seen in Chicago. You're seeing the guy that we saw in Philadelphia, a little bit in Detroit early in Ben Johnson's career. A guy that's capable of 5.5, 6 yards a clip on runs. A guy, I mean, here's the thing. We talk so much about Swift not seeing where he needs to go. You forget how fast and dynamic this guy can be when he's running north and south with the football. And that's what we're seeing with Swift. I mean, I like what Monangai's doing, and Monangai runs hard. But, just get a stopwatch and watch if it's just Swift running north and south. Watch how quickly Swift gets to the line of scrimmage versus Monangai if they're not stopping and dancing, if they're just running straight ahead where the play is supposed to develop. Swift is so fast to that hole. And that's exciting. If this is what we can get out of this run game, DeAndre Swift's going to be here in 2026. And the Bears aren't going to be looking for a running back as much as we thought they were going to be, because this is a different version of Swift in terms of what they can get out of him with running the football, because we know Swift has limited vision. That's not going to change, and that's still the issue with him. But if this line is opening up holes like they can, and Swift can use his speed to get 4 or 5 yards past the line of scrimmage, and he doesn't need as much vision at that point if that initial point of attack is wide open for him, then he can kind of see where the defense is set up and the quickest point to get an extra 5, 6, 7 yards if he can. There's a whole different variety of who Swift can be if he gets this kind of blocking, which he has not gotten last year and the early part of this year. We talked about it on this podcast, about how disjointed the running game looked. And you could sit there with the advanced stats and say that the Bears are leading the league in yards before contact for Swift and everything. But that also, so maybe there's a little push there, but they're not holding their blocks. So Swift may be getting 2 yards, but then he's getting swallowed up because after 2 yards, he has no place to go. So those statistics can be a little misleading because that did look disjointed. And I never sat here and blamed DeAndre Swift for being terrible. I said there's just things in the running game that are clearly not working. But they started working finally here these last 2 weeks. And this is the Ben Johnson rushing attack that we expected to see. This is the Detroit Lions Ben Johnson type. And Jahmyr Gibbs is not, DeAndre Swift is not Jahmyr Gibbs. He's not that level of talent. So when we're seeing this with Swift, this is the Ben Johnson scheme. This is what it needs to be. And when you get this kind of rushing attack, if you start getting this kind of rushing attack established, the defense is going to have to start respecting that run game a lot more. And that, in theory, should start opening stuff up for Caleb Williams. Because if we're being honest, and we need to be honest on this podcast, we always are. We never sugarcoat anything. Caleb Williams has been bad the last couple of weeks. Now, did he deserve the amount of criticism that Troy Aikman gave him? Probably not. I said last week I thought Troy was over the top. But at the same time, he certainly deserved criticism, and he did not play well against the Saints. And I don't know exactly what the issue is. I am not a quarterback expert. I'm not going to sit here and say that this arm angle was bad, this footwork was bad. I'm not, when I rewatch a game, I watch the offensive line. When the Bears have the ball in offense, I watch the offensive line a ton, and then I'll look downfield and kind of see what's developing with the receivers in terms of, were opportunities missed? Was someone wide open? Did something happen where a play may have gone south? I don't sit there and watch Caleb Williams too much because I don't know exactly what to look for in terms of the exact arm angle, the exact, in terms of footwork and exactly which foot needs to be forward at which time and all that. I'm not going to pretend that I know as much as Kurt Warner, so I'm not even going to try. But I am going to say, I know what it needs to look like, and what we've seen from Caleb Williams the last couple of weeks is not what it needs to look like. I'm not panicking about Caleb Williams because I still think the growth has been pretty good this entire season. And the fact that Ben Johnson is working with him is where I feel more at ease because, yes, it's not consistent, but it doesn't have to be consistent at this point. It's going to have to be towards, mid-November and into December and into January if the Bears are going to put this all together this season. But it doesn't have to be right now. The other parts of this roster can hold this together. So with Caleb Williams, there still just needs to be patience. The Ravens defense should be a little better this week with Roquan Smith and some of the other guys back. But even when they were playing earlier this season, the Ravens defense was very exploitable. And Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams need to do that again this week. We need to see that. Lamar Jackson might be back. The Bears might lose this game, but we need to see a little more cohesiveness from the pass defense because the Ravens should allow that in theory, despite them being preseason considered the best roster in the NFL. We have to look at what's in front of us, and what's in front of us is a Ravens defense that gives up a lot of points. So we'll have to see what happens with all this, but we're going to talk about this game and the Bears, the big picture, and how this team looks right now with Anthony Herron. He's going to join me next. This is Bill Zimmerman, Bears Banter. We'll be right back. Welcome back into the podcast. Always excited to have this gentleman on. He always provides great insight on the Chicago Bears or anything else that he covers. He is Anthony Herron. You can catch him on The Score. You can catch him on the Big Ten Network. He does Fox 32 pregame, and he joins me now. Big Ant, Bill Zimmerman, how are you?
What's up, Bill? Always great chopping it up with you, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. This should be fun. I mean, we're getting a chance to talk here off something positive here. Bears have won 4 in a row. I want to we'll do some big picture stuff, but I want to talk to you specifically about the Saints game, and I want to start on the defensive side of the ball. We talk so much about Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams, but this defensive performance was fantastic. I know little lapse there, end of the second quarter, beginning of the third quarter for about 5-6 minutes of football, but really saw that aggressive play that you expected from a Dennis Allen defense. I know there was something maybe extra on the line for the Saints with Dennis Allen, but really kind of felt like this was the first time we really saw the Dennis Allen defense.
It felt like that. And the way that they were able to attack New Orleans and make plays on the football, really impressive to sustain it, because it's one thing to possibly catch an opponent off guard with that, but now we've seen this sustained for 4 games in a row now, where they're making plays on the ball in flight, where they're attacking the pocket and putting the quarterback under both physical and mental duress. And that's essentially the hallmark of a Dennis Allen defense. He's not necessarily always a guy who brings the house consistently with a blitz package. He's not necessarily always a guy who, has a defensive front that rushes the quarterback at a high level. He's kind of a hybrid where he's found ways to attack opponents in a variety of different angles over the years that he's called plays defensively in the National Football League. And what we saw them do against, yes, a young quarterback in Spencer Rattler from the Saints, but they've got playmakers. We know what Chris Olave is capable of with the speed that he brings to the table. Alvin Kamara has been one of the most versatile backs in football for years now. And yeah, he's a little bit banged up, but really impressed with the way that the Bears were able to continue to take advantage of playmaking opportunities. And Rattler going into that game was really protecting the football at a high level as a quarterback. And they were able to still find ways, as opposed to coming up with pass deflections, they were coming up with interceptions. They were getting sack force fumbles. It's a defense that's really rallying to the football at a high level.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about some of that creativity and some of the things that Dennis Allen does, not always necessarily blitzing, the house, so to speak, but you saw that creativity on display on Sunday. I mean, with the 4 sacks, you saw, Tremaine Edmonds, a couple from the secondary. I think they had 7 or 8 QB hits. I think 5 of them, only 2 or 3 of them came from Montez Sweat and Dominique Robinson. Everything else came from linebackers in the secondary. So you saw him mixing it up, showing different looks, blitzing from different areas of the field, and really trying to keep Spencer Rattler off balance, not knowing where the pressure was going to be coming from, hopefully trying to confuse that offensive line. So I think you kind of talk about that creativity that Dennis Allen does. I guess talk about that a little bit and how he can utilize the players on the back 7 as well.
One of the things that I find most encouraging about this stretch they're in, Bill, is the fact that we're seeing some of the starters get healthy right now, and it's immediately paying dividends. So you already had a defense that was without Jalen Johnson, of course, and that continues to be the case. But TJ Edwards and Kyler Gordon back into the lineup, that's really been a big deal, because especially Kyler Gordon, the versatility that he brings to the table, and then from a TJ Edwards perspective, the decisiveness that he adds to the linebacker position. So now the run defense has been positively impacted, and then also the way they rush the quarterback. And we don't always think of a nickel, a slot corner as a guy who impacts the pass rush. But to Matt Eberflus's credit, we did see Kyler Gordon's versatility on display even in the Eberflus scheme. And that's one of the reasons that DA was so excited as he came here to Chicago to work with Kyler Gordon, because of the versatility of his talent, what he brings to the table. And as I evaluated him when he was coming out of college at Washington, I recognized that he could cover. I recognized that he was physical in both coverage and run support, but I didn't see him play near the line of scrimmage that frequently in college at Washington. He's been asked to do that a lot in his Bears career, and he's gotten so good at that as a defensive back body, but being willing to take on bigger blockers to fit the run as a linebacker, not with the same type of physicality where you can, stack a blocker with inside hand placement and stand up some 300-pound lineman. He's not doing that, but he finds his own version of it, getting into the hip of a pulling blocker with an aggressive angle to sort of cut off where the run lane could end up declaring itself. He's really found a knack for how to do that to essentially be this hybrid player of sometimes a linebacker, sometimes a slot corner, sometimes a safety, sometimes an outside corner, and he does it all so effectively. But in assisting the pass rush, what he does in timing up the blitz and then really effectively using proper angles and leverage to get to the quarterback in the pocket, it's not something every defensive back does well, but Kyler Gordon is one of the best in the business at it.
Yeah, he's really been showing up here and showing off since he's been back from injury. So let me ask you about someone on that defensive line. I want to ask you about Montez Sweat, who, certainly didn't have a stellar season last year. And we do know he was playing through injuries. And obviously the whole team struggled, especially on the last, 10, 11 games of the season. But slow start to the year for him. But these last couple of games, he started popping a little on tape a little bit and had just another outstanding performance on Sunday. And to me, this defensive line was all about Montez Sweat. And if he could return more to that second half of the 2023 season and what we've seen the last couple of games, it looks like he might be headed that direction once again.
It's been good to see him consistently kind of progress here in recent weeks. His style of play is different than a lot of the other defensive ends and edge defenders that he's compared with because there's so much physicality to Montez Sweat's game. And it's not like he's not built like Julius Peppers. He's not some 290-pound defensive end, but he is fairly hulking in his stature. But his body weight, his body mass doesn't indicate the style of play he uses. When we saw them play against the Raiders a few weeks back, you got the direct comparison where Max Crosby is the style of guy that, yes, he can play every snap of a game virtually, but he's constantly avoiding blocks and using sort of finesse to be slippery to penetrate into gaps, flying into the backfield. So there's a cardiovascular end of the conditioning that Max Crosby uses that's just different than Montez Sweat. Montez Sweat plays from a tight alignment very frequently, works into blockers with force on a regular basis. So as a run defender, whether you're talking Eberflus's scheme when he first joined the Bears or now Dennis Allen's scheme, it's really important to have a guy willing to hit blocks and set a firm edge like Montez Sweat does. But it does make it difficult to play, 75 out of 80 snaps in a game if you have an opponent throwing tempo at you or something like that, because that physicality really catches up with you throughout. And even as a pass rusher, he tends to start with power. He likes to begin down the middle of a blocker and then work off the block from there. The sack he got against the Saints the other day, pressed the pocket with some force and then retraced as Spencer Rattler started to climb vertically in the pocket. That's Montez Sweat's game. I would like to see him more frequently, and he started to do it a little bit more to frankly rush like he's Max Crosby or Aiden Hutchinson. He doesn't move like those guys. He's a little stiffer in the hips than those guys are, but to every once in a while just use. He's got great straight line speed. I like seeing him burst out of his stance and just fly upfield into the backfield, put some speed in the feet of the offensive tackle. That can set up counter moves that he's capable of. And we're starting to get a little bit more of that in recent weeks, a willingness just to avoid blockers and occasionally use some finesse moves just to be a quick penetrator as opposed to so frequently feeling like he needs to operate with power and to overwhelm a blocker with force.
Let me ask you a little bit more on the defense. Let me ask you about the turnovers. Obviously, 4 turnovers against the Saints. They've been forcing a lot of turnovers here in the last couple games. And you always hear the one thing about turnovers are not sustainable because they're a little too fluky or whatever. And I know Dennis Allen and Ben Johnson will refute that and say that that's not the case. The 2018 Bears, obviously phenomenal turnovers for the full season. 2019, they didn't have as much luck. Now, maybe that was because Vic Fangio wasn't there. No offense to Chuck Pagano, but I don't think they're at the same level of defensive coordinator. Or maybe it is the fact that, trying to sustain those turnovers consistently is just too hard for a defense to do. What do you think about turnovers? Can you be a defense that's focused on turnovers and that's part of your defensive game plan, or is there something about not being able to sustain it?
But there's a reason that Kevin Byard has the most interceptions in the National Football League since he joined the league a decade ago. Some guys do have a real knack for that. Unfortunately, Eddie Jackson, we didn't see him continue on that trajectory, even though early in his career he was a guy showing those types of skills. But Kevin Byard, he continues to show that he's a guy who's got a nose for the football. And we've seen multiple versions of it. You think back to the Raiders games where he's got 2 interceptions on a veteran quarterback who, he sets him up and sort of baits him into throwing an underneath route, a curl route, and Byard drives on those routes and makes pretty incredible interceptions, like diving in front of the pass catcher to be able to make those grabs. But then stylistically, a different interception he had against the Saints the other day where he's ranging from 1 hash mark all the way to the opposing sideline in a scramble drill sort of moment where a young quarterback thinks he's got an opportunity to feed the football up the sideline and doesn't necessarily, have enough respect for the range that Kevin Byard can show to get to that football. Byard undercuts that route and makes a great grab near the sideline, just narrowly stays in bounds. So, he's one example of a number of guys who I think now mentally have a real feel for how Dennis Allen wants them to operate. And so on the back end, it's showing up. Great to see Jaquan Brisker come up with an interception against the Commanders, reading a route well. And I think the Brisker example is a good one where now that they're in the flow of this, because what you say is certainly something that I agree. A lot of folks say that turnovers, takeaways on defense, as we like to call them, aren't sustainable. But I do think when people reference them coming in bunches, there's a reason. There's an explainable reason for that. Because when you see your teammates getting into the flow of punching the football out or undercutting routes and making plays on the ball like Nashawn Wright has done a couple of times this season, that becomes contagious. That enhances the confidence and the willingness that other defenders have. I mean, TJ Edwards almost had a diving interception the other day before the Bears got after the quarterback and took it away a moment later. We're seeing that now these Bears defenders are just in this mode of feeling like they're almost offensive players. So that does become contagious with the way that you can swarm to the football. And when the ball's in flight, Tremaine Edmonds, mentally, emotionally, he can view this and say, this is a takeaway that I have an opportunity to get, and this is just who we are. It becomes a part of your DNA as a defense once you get this thing rolling.
Yeah, and yeah, like you said, it absolutely can be contagious, and we've seen that, like 2018 Bears, the mid-'80s Bears. Yeah, when the turnovers come, they certainly come. So, and the mastermind behind that, of course, is Dennis Allen, and I thought the locker room with him getting the game ball from Ben Johnson was really awesome. Obviously, he was the head coach of the Saints. It didn't work out well. He had spent a lot of time there, and I think. Look, we always hear coaches, they try and, play it buttoned up and say, oh, yeah, it's just another game. I'm just focused on the Bears now and all this kind of stuff. But I think you saw what that meant to Dennis Allen and what it meant to his defense, just getting around him, hugging him, the excitement that they all share together. I think, beyond just Dennis Allen, but Ben Johnson and what is being created in that locker room right now is really something special. And it's the kind of, connection. It's the kind of culture that really breeds winning. And I think we're starting to see that.
That connectivity is really enhanced by having success, the tangible evidence of success that's there. And these guys haven't known Dennis Allen for a long time. He just showed up here with Ben Johnson. And Dennis Allen was in Atlanta. When I was with the Atlanta Falcons, it was very early in his NFL career, but we were there together in 2004, 2005. He was actually the assistant defensive line coach. So he was in the meeting room with us as the D-line pretty consistently during those years. And he's always been a really conscientious guy. In some ways, I'll use the term mild-mannered because he's not a demonstrative guy as a communicator, but there's, in a similar fashion to Ben Johnson, a real intensity to his workflow and what he demands of players, the expectation that's consistently set for detailed excellence. And that's showing up now with the Bears, and you're seeing the respect the players have for that and just the recognition they all have as competitors with guys who've been, maybe with a couple of different organizations, have felt perhaps discounted in one way or another. and for Dennis Allen to be able to do that. He delivered the message he was supposed to deliver during the week about respecting the Saints, the opportunity that was there, but that not necessarily being a motivating factor for him or the team. But like you referenced, Bill, we saw it in the post-game locker room. We know that there's always that little extra emphasis that's there as a competitor to prove to your old boss, to prove to your old girlfriend, whatever the case may be, where you want them to know, I got things going good, even though we ended up splitting apart.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with Dennis Allen, taking it a step further and looking a little more big picture and really pulling back, the one thing that I really liked about this, and I hate to kind of say this about a guy that lost a job a couple of times, but very rarely, especially for a defensive coach, do you ever get 3 opportunities to be a head coach in the NFL? You know, like John Fox was a head coach 3 different opportunities, but he had, you know, he took teams to Super Bowls. So you don't see that too often. So Dennis Allen has had a couple opportunities, and he's here now as Ben Johnson's defensive coordinator. And I've talked about this a little bit, is the idea, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself with the Kansas City Chiefs, but the comparison of Andy Reid having Steve Spagnuolo together, where you have that great offensive-minded head coach and a defensive coordinator who's just not going to be a head coach again, most likely. And they can stay together for years and build something as the 1A and 1B of this football team. And I think there's a real opportunity for that to happen in Chicago and provide some stability that we just have not seen this franchise have for the last 15 or so years.
And that potential being there is a really cool sort of version of hiring for the Bears to sort of recognize that, where there's conjecture for the last few regimes about what does it mean to have an offensive coach in? Well, if you lose the offensive coach, then he may go elsewhere because you don't have the OC. Or, well, all right, are we better off with the defensive guy to make sure that's straight? And who cares about the OC? Now you have this offensive mastermind at the top of the ledger. He's hired a defensive coordinator who presumably could be here in lockstep with him for years if this really goes well and if they continue to build off of where they're at right now at 4-2. And that's one of the elements of this that feels so different to me than last season's 4-2, because that question has, of course, come up a lot here this week, even players and coaches being asked about it a little bit so far. But you and I covered it closely. Last season felt more like desperation 4-2, you know, because Matt Eberflus was effectively on the hot seat. We wondered whether or not it made sense to keep him around. And we already heard so many chirps early in 2024 from the players in that locker room, and whether or not they felt like the coaches were on the same page with them. Were they being led in the way that they felt like they should be led? Were things being demanded of them? There was a lot that was already coming out of there early in what should have been viewed as a successful season. Now here, you can tell it feels more like everyone is in tune with Ben Johnson's vision, Dennis Allen himself included within that. And so their kismet and the way that they can work off of each other, if this does continue to grow, you get more from the passing attack, you get consistency from the ground game, you manufacture the pass rush when necessary, as we're seeing DA get figured out here, then there's a lot of opportunity in Chicago to keep growing.
Yeah, there really is. And let me ask you about Ben Johnson, because, you know, I thought it was interesting in January when he was hired. Nobody questioned the offensive mind, you know, at all. The question was, well, he's always been a coordinator. Dan Campbell was the leader of that locker room. Ben Johnson hasn't had to do that. He's, you know, we heard that he's just a nerd who likes to draw up plays on the whiteboard. He doesn't know how to be a leader of men. That's what we heard a lot about, the leader of men. That's why they needed Mike Vrabel or Jim Harbaugh. You know, they needed that leader of men type. But to me, what I've seen is that is exactly who Ben Johnson is. He is that leader of men. He is that culture builder. He just hadn't had the opportunity to do it, and now we're seeing it here. So what have you seen from Ben Johnson, kind of just overall, not so much offensive scheme. We'll get into the offense here in a second, but Ben Johnson is kind of that Sunday sideline CEO and the leader of this locker room.
It's been impressive. I mean, my rookie season when I was with the Detroit Lions, a guy named Marty Mornhinweg was our head coach, and he was a part of the, you know, Bill Walsh coaching tree, the West Coast offense, and, you know, what Steve Mariucci began to build there in San Francisco. At the time, Matt Millen wanted to hire Mooch from San Francisco. The 49ers didn't let that happen, so Matt Millen felt like, well, you know what? I'll get Mooch's sidekick. He runs the same offense. He knows how to do this thing. Sure, he wasn't calling plays, but we'll get it figured out with Marty Mornhinweg. And in a similar fashion to Matt Nagy, when he was hired here by the Bears not too long ago, it's a different deal when you get the big whistle for the first time. Do you truly know what your personality is? And are you confident enough to exude that to the locker room, to the organization as a whole? So part of why things fell apart very quickly for us and Marty Mornhinweg in Detroit. He was always meant to have the offensive coordinator role as his ceiling. He just wasn't suited to be a head man, a leader of men, if you will. Ben Johnson, very early here, does seem like he's got that within him. There's a confidence that he comports himself with. The communication is very strong. And as important as anything, Bill, the consistency of his demands. When the locker room sees leadership that's kind of up and down, roller coastering all over the place, bad times, good times, you're not completely sure what to expect at the top, then things can fracture very easily. If that leadership doesn't necessarily demand things of you on a consistent basis, and as uncomfortable as it was last season to hear players speaking out so much about feeling like they weren't being challenged or they weren't being demanded of and detailed and everything else, you know what? It got uncomfortable, but in the end, it was legitimate. We know a lot about how Matt Eberflus was running things. And so even from a player perspective, you're hearing the way that they're describing Ben Johnson and all his assistants, his coordinators and the assistant coaches, consistently demanding excellence and detail from the players. And it's certainly not a finished product yet. As you've seen, well, there are things with penalties and missed assignments and things for them to continue to get cleaned up. But part of the evidence that's there from a win-loss perspective, it's born from the way Ben Johnson handles himself. That line in the sand after the Detroit game, it was drawn in big red letters. You could see that something different needed to happen with that embarrassment that was there in week 2. And I don't know that many of us would have predicted the Bears would win the next 4 games, but you could tell Ben Johnson was very confident he was going to be as demanding of his players as he's been, and that's showing up. And his players have responded to it. So now these tangible results of wins, this ends up mounting with their trust in Ben Johnson. And you're hearing them communicate things in that way. Because when you got a guy who's going to demand the most of you during the week, but you're seeing that it lends itself to positive results on Sundays, you're more willing than ever to give your everything to that guy, not just on game day, not on the practice field, but in the meeting rooms, with your treatment schedule, with how you're preparing and being as detailed as you can in all these things, because you have a coach consistently demanding that of you. So that combination has worked really well for the Bears as they've responded from 0-2.
All right, let me ask you a little bit about this offense here before we wrap up with Herron. And let's start with the run game, because it looked really disjointed early on. And, Swift wasn't seeing the field and the openings that when they were there quite as well. But these last couple of games, it has been different. Like when we always heard about the Ben Johnson run game in Detroit, like this is what it looks like now, right? That we've seen here against Washington and New Orleans. And I've been critical of DeAndre Swift. I'm not going to pretend I haven't been, but, and that was mostly about, kind of in between the tackles and maybe some vision issues in terms of where those running lanes were going to be. But the way the line's blocking now, the way Swift is running right now, this run game is really looking impressive. And if they can keep this going, Caleb Williams, we'll talk about him next here, but if they keep this going, it gives the pressure off Caleb here and with the defense playing well and them running the ball well. You can kind of go back to maybe 1980s, 1990s football, but you could be effective and win football games that way.
Right. I mean, the Lovie Smith era, this was kind of the formula, right? You take it away on defense, you run the rock on offense, and just see what you get from the quarterback position. And all of us have higher hopes for Caleb than that. But specific to the ground attack, my concern coming out of the offseason, it was sort of multi-layered. One, Ben Johnson obviously had some previous experience with DeAndre Swift. What did he think of DeAndre Swift? How did he feel about the overall skill set he brought to the table? It seemed to indicate the fact that the Bears didn't go out and find some other veteran back to pair with Swift, because I never thought they were going to trade or cut DeAndre Swift. But the fact that they were confident enough to say, we're just going to go draft a kid in the 7th round and have some unproven other guy in Roschon Johnson. DeAndre Swift is the focal point of our run game. That was the big, bold statement they made in the offseason by not going and getting some other obvious 1-2 sort of counterpunch with Swift. And so with that approach, it indicated Ben Johnson did have some confidence in Swift. But then also that, to me, to the point you made a moment ago about the Lions run game, I believe he's just abundantly confident in his ability to scheme up the run, to find lanes for playmakers, not only for running backs, but for wide receivers who are going to get carries as well. And we've seen him able to do that just in sort of nurturing a ground attack and getting it to the point where now, coming off the bye week, it's not only some of the cute schematics that I thought he was pretty effective with early in the season when the O-line wasn't moving anyone. Now we're to the point where you see the O-line moving people and DeAndre Swift not only being the guy he's always been in the past, where if you scheme him into open space, he's a home run waiting to happen. He's always been that. But to your point, we do see now more willingness to get north and south, to be a vertical runner, to press the hole. And sure, sometimes it's going to be a 2-yard gain, but sometimes it's going to be a 12-yard gain. And now that sets up the opportunities to hit the exterior of the defense. When you attack the defense with the run game vertically and horizontally, it makes it that much more difficult to contain. And we've talked about the no block, no rock moniker a good bit this season. A lot of us who cover the Bears, you're seeing wide receivers stalk blocking out in space. So all 11 people are engaged in this ground attack in a way that's made it really productive lately.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch. And while you brought up those wide receivers, let me ask you about the passing scheme and kind of what you've seen that in terms of the development of the passing game with Ben Johnson, because I think, we talked about a lot in the offseason about how they were going to live in 12 personnel and Kmet and Loveland were going to be eating together and all this stuff. And we haven't really seen much from the tight ends yet. I know Colston was banged up a little bit there and Cole struggled against the Raiders catching the football. But we even with that, we haven't seen that as much. We've seen a lot of Rome Odunze. We've seen some DJ Moore. They've moved the ball around a lot, but not as much to the tight ends. But I'm still impressed with a lot of what I've seen. I think Ben's scheming a lot of guys open when you pull back, and even on the broadcast, not just looking at the all 22, but even on the broadcast when they show the big view. I've been impressed with what I've seen from Ben Johnson. What have you seen so far? Anywhere where you'd like to see things improve in the pass game?
I think the Colston Loveland aspect of it, I was comparing this a bit on the Score the other day where, my evaluation of Caleb Williams, comparing him with Jaden Daniels coming out of the draft for the previous season, Jaden Daniels was just more of a finished product as a quarterback. Perhaps Caleb's ceiling higher as a splash level playmaker, but Jaden Daniels had just played more football, been tasked with learning more schemes in college, had more time on task. And so the consistency of QB mechanics and decisiveness, he was just going to be further along in his development because he'd just done it a lot more at the major college level, whereas Caleb would have that room to grow. The Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland comparison is going to continue. And I was at Colts training camp. I know they were ecstatic about the Bears drafting Colston Loveland instead of Tyler Warren, but I'm still really bullish on the overall ceiling of Colston Loveland. But Tyler Warren, what he was asked to do at Penn State and finishing his full eligibility there season by season, just developing into a better and more physical blocker, running the entire route tree and also being a ball carrier and being a guy who handled volume in their offense as a pass catcher and just managing that load mentally and physically. Colston Loveland was never in a position where he needed to do that at Michigan. So he's not as far along in his development, but I do love the ceiling of Colston Loveland. And Cole Kmet is having one of the best seasons he's had as a member of the Bears, as both a blocker, and I love the fact that he's more consistently going out and catching the football with his hands. That was a big bugaboo, in my opinion, for Cole Kmet throughout a lot of his career. Seeing him do that when the opportunity presents itself now. The tight end position is doing well. I'm really eager to see Luther Burden get more and more involved as a wide receiver. I think out of the guys they have at wide out, I'm a big fan of DJ Moore, but he's kind of a running back body playing wide out. And that can be utilized in a lot of ways, just like, of course, the Deebo Samuel comparison that's pretty consistently there. But as far as just a guy who really runs routes like a wide receiver, plucks the ball with quiet, confident hands like a wide receiver, and can transition from being pass catcher to pass receiver, route runner, and then get into playmaker mode after the rock's in his hands, Luther Burden just moves differently. So I like
Yes.
Roma Dunze a lot. I'm just hoping that the ceiling that I believe is there for Roma Dunze will more consistently be realized for contested catches and physicality in his route running with his big body. There's area there for Roma Dunze to continue to keep getting more consistent. And if he does, then the ceiling of the quarterback has the best opportunity to be fully realized.
All right, and last one for you. We've gotten through almost the whole interview without really any conversation to Caleb Williams. Been nice to talk about some other things. Me and Caleb usually dominates the conversation. But let me ask you, we'll just do it kind of straightforward like this. We know Caleb hasn't played as well the last couple of weeks here. But overall, just looking at his season, what is one thing you've seen this year that you're most impressed with? And what's one thing, other than accuracy, which I think we all sit here and say we need to see him being more accurate on some of these passes. Other than accuracy, what's one thing you'd like to see him improve upon the most?
So this last game against the Saints, this is the first time I left evaluating a game this season and felt like I saw a version of Caleb Williams that was being greedy. Looking for the big play, looking for the special pretty consistently. But I'm viewing that right now in a glass is half full sort of way and saying that we got through the first 5 games of the year and there's a lot to consume with a Ben Johnson offense. And Caleb was trying to pare down his style of play to be within the framework of what Ben Johnson was designing. I thought he did that pretty effectively. And for this to be now game number 6, being the first time that I came out of a game and said, yeah, Caleb was dropping back, passing up on the check down. He was dropping back, looking for opportunities to scramble around. It's the first game I really felt like that was something that he consistently went back to sort of college mode in that way. So he got through the first 5 games without me really feeling like that was a big problem. It did show up against the Saints, but I get confidence from those first 5 games of feeling like I'm seeing a quarterback that's maturing with the way he's handling the position. And, I suppose the thing I feel like he's maybe been least effective with, because, avoiding sacks is a part of that same thing I was describing from a positive perspective. But, beyond the accuracy is just his willingness to utilize his legs. And I know there's a dichotomy between wanting a guy to operate from the pocket and then how often is he scrambling around. But to me, scramble mode Caleb, running sideline to sideline, reverse pivoting, spinning around everywhere, I don't need to see that much. But just to decisively say, I'm willing to run vertically and pick up 8 yards or 15 yards with their man coverage and slide. I just want him to show some faith and confidence that that's okay for him to keep in his game. And I want that to be a more definitive and decisive aspect of how he operates.
I like that answer a lot. All right, so there he is, Big Ant Herron on Twitter. You can follow him there, and of course, you can watch him on the Big Ten Network, listen to him on The Score, and also on the Fox 32 pregame. Anthony, thanks for so much time. That was a great interview. Hope to do it again soon.
All right, no problem, Bill. We'll do it again, man. Thanks.
All right, there he is, Anthony Herron. Everybody, another great interview with Ant Herron. You should check him out on Twitter. Check him out at the Big Ten Network. Check him out everywhere. He is awesome. I love talking to him. So let's jump into the mailbag. We got a good number of questions here. Let's start with Jay. Who are you hearing that might be traded to the Bears? Is there anyone you prefer? Jay, I have not heard that the Bears are legitimately in on anyone right now. I don't have a specific name that I prefer. I think, they're not going to be able to add an edge that's going to be able to make an impact here at the deadline. I'd like to see him get a cornerback. I think they could use some depth at cornerback, at least a guy behind right, if not a guy who can start in front of right. Stevenson's now banged up. That's what I think they need to do. I think they need to add a cornerback. I don't think they should give up any major assets. I think 5th round pick or later. I do not want to see them make a big splash. I do not think they should make a big splash. Dante Purify. Are we satisfied with Duvernay's sure hands? Would like to see more aggressive returns. Give All-Day Jade a shot. Okay. Look, Walker, the problem with Walker is that he's not active on Sundays, Dante. That's the issue. He's usually one of the guys that's inactive. If you're going to make him active, you've got to make sure he can't just be on kick returns. He has to do a lot. He has to be the gunner on punts. He's got to do multiple things. Can he do that? I don't know. I don't know enough about Walker's special teams game. We'll have Patrick Manley on. Maybe we can talk about that with him down the line. But until we do, I'm not going to sit here and pretend, because Walker's not going to see the field on offense. He's just not. There's too many talented wide receivers in front of him, between the 2 tight ends they have and the 4 receivers they have, trying to get them on the offensive field. There's no room for Walker to be out there. So he has to make an impact solely on special teams. The question is, can he do it on multiple facets? And I don't know enough about special teams to pretend to be able to answer that and give you a BS answer that other people might. So I don't worry about, dynamic returns that much. I'd much rather take 0 positive plays with 0 negative plays than I would a couple big positive plays, but a couple big negative plays. Negative plays on special teams are crushing. So I would like to avoid negative plays at special teams all the time. I'll be a dud, and you give me the ball at the 30-yard line on kicks every time. I understand touchbacks are at the 35, but I'm saying I'll take the ball at the 30-yard line every time on kicks if you can promise me no fumbles, no screw-ups where they get the ball at the 4-yard line because they barely get the ball out of the end zone, no muffed punts. None. If you can tell me that, I will just deal with that. Like, I hate negative plays on special teams, so not worth the risk for me. Kevin Brown, do you think the Bears are going to make a trade before the deadline, and for what position? As I said before, Kevin, I would say they make a trade at cornerback. I don't think they should trade for anything else. They're not going to trade for a quarterback. They're not going to trade for a wide receiver. They're not going to trade for a tight end. They're not going to trade for any offensive lineman. They're not going to trade for a running back the way Swift is playing. They're not going to trade for a linebacker. They're not going to trade for a safety. You've got quarterbacks, and then you've got the defensive line. In terms that you got to wait to see what you have with Grady Jarrett. You don't want to lose snaps for Shamar Turner, assuming he's going to get better and play some more often. And you've got Austin Booker coming back at defensive end. So you don't need anyone except at cornerback. All right, Jason Black, would you entertain the chance to Max Crosby? Also, if you can pick one player that is rumored to be available at the trade deadline, who would you be interested in? And do you think Poles would be interested in? Well, first of all, I think Poles is going to work with Ben Johnson on anything. I think it's going to take mutual interest. And one, I don't think Max Crosby is available. I mean, all right, because I would see that Jason Black asked about Max Crosby, Alex Wallen asked about Max Crosby, and John DeBears K35 asked about Max Crosby. So we're going to talk about Max Crosby here for a second. The Bears cannot afford to trade for Max Crosby. One, let's look at this from the Raiders' perspective. Why would they hire the oldest coach in NFL history to trade away their best player? They are not trying to rebuild in Las Vegas. And I understand Geno Smith stinks and they're off to a terrible start. They are not trying to rebuild. They are trying to be competitive as quickly as possible. You would not hire Pete Carroll if you were planning on ripping it down to the studs and stinking for 2 or 3 years. That's not what they're doing. So because things took a little bit slower out of the gate, because Geno Smith is a turd, that does not mean they are going to trade Max Crosby. I see no way the Raiders are trading Max Crosby. That being said, let's pretend the Raiders are going to trade Max Crosby. How are the Bears going to do this? They've paid $25 million a year for Montez Sweat and $16 million a year for Odengbo. Unless Montez Sweat is going to the Raiders in the Max Crosby deal, I see that as an impossible trade. The other thing, and I have said this on Twitter, and I see people like dragging the tweets, trying to like mock the tweets. Nobody is talking about how much, and you don't have to because it's the middle of the season, but the Bears are up against the cap next year. Go look at OTC. Go look at over the cap. The Chicago Bears right now, the cap is projected to be about $300 million. The Chicago Bears have not the top 51. They've only got, I think, 39 players signed for next year right now. They have $3 million in cap space. So to get up to their 51, they are going to be over the cap by multiple $1 million. They have work to do to get under the cap. Why? And you sit there and say, but they have Caleb Williams on a rookie contract. They should be able to pay these players. Yes, they paid Montez Sweat. They paid Tremaine Edmonds. They've paid, DJ Moore. They've paid Jalen Johnson. They've paid multiple guys over $20 million a year. They have to figure out who is a part of this team and who is not. Yes, they can cut a couple guys. Tremaine Edmonds, I know he's playing really well now. He's probably going to get cut. It's going to be hard to justify Tremaine Edmonds next year at $18 million a year. Unless they restructure his contract, he's willing to come back for less, and that cap hit drops down to like $11 million. TJ Edwards range. That's where Tremaine Edmonds needs to get paid. I understand they can restructure contracts and push some stuff down the line and open up some money. I'm not saying the Bears have to cut guys to get under the cap. There's things they can do, but they can't just go out and spend wildly, trade first-round picks, multiple for Max Crosby, and then bring him in and pay him the amount of money that he's getting paid without getting rid of guys. Like, people were asking me last week about Jeffrey Simmons. Well, the Titans need weapons for Cam Ward. So I said a very rare type player, trade DJ Moore for Jeffrey Simmons. That's the kind of trades the Bears need to look at. They don't have the cap space. Now, they can restructure contracts, but if they restructure contracts, they're pushing guaranteed money down the line, and those cap hits are going to go up. So it's going to be harder to get out of those contracts. So if the Bears want to punt money down the line for Cole Kmet or DJ Moore or Montez Sweat to open up cap space, well, they damn well better be sure that those guys are going to be on the team for the next 3 years or so, because otherwise you're going to get more dead money when you do decide to part ways with the guys. So the Bears have to be very careful with how they are approaching this offseason and this trade deadline in terms of making significant trades. I don't think the Bears should do it. I don't think Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles will plan on doing it because, one, I don't think the Bears are ready to really contend for a Super Bowl. Maybe they make the playoffs, but I don't think they're at that point. And I think they don't know exactly who is a part of this roster in 2026 yet. There's going to be some surprise people off this team. They're going to have to maneuver. Like DeAndre Swift, we're just like, well, he's gone. That'll save $8 million. Maybe it won't. Because if you're going to get rid of DeAndre Swift at $8 million, you can't get anyone to play running back much cheaper than that. You might be able to get a pretty good one at $5-6 million, but that's not saving that much money. You're going to, or you want to commit a first or a second round pick to a running back, because that's the only other thing you can do. If you want to save money, you've got to get that to, you have to get a rookie on that roster. So it's a complicated situation in terms of how the Bears are going to approach their roster construction next year. So you have to keep that in mind. Like, you can't just sit there and be like, let's get Max Crosby. All right, what's your plan to get Max Crosby? You're going to make Odengbo the third edge at $16 million a year? They're not doing that. They committed starter money to Odengbo. Montez Sweat has starter money. So unless they're making a trade where a significant player is coming back, and I don't think it's an Odengbo, it has to be Montez Sweat. That's the only way that's going to happen. But more so, I look at this from the Raiders' perspective and say, there's no way the Raiders are trading Max Crosby. I'd be stunned. Pete Carroll was brought in to make them a winner, and you don't make them a winner. I'm not saying win a Super Bowl. Make them just a competitive football team capable of winning 9 games. That's what he was brought in to do, and you don't do that by trading Max Crosby. TJ Kobig, what will it take for Ben Johnson to crack a smile on the Bears sideline this Sunday? He cracks a smile in the locker room, TJ, when the Bears win games. That's when he cracks a smile, and I'm good with that. Let him have his psychosis face on the sidelines. That's fine. I don't need to see him smile. Hey, he smiled at the sideline reporter after he said, we'll be just fine. He smirked. Then he gave her a death stare. So we'll see him smile. May not be in a typical way, but I'm fine if Ben Johnson doesn't want to smile until he's in the locker room. David Cromlow, are you even remotely close to pressing the panic button on Caleb Williams? Funny, David, with the 2 games he's played the last 2 weeks, I'm less here now than I was against Minnesota. And it's because I've seen enough positives in other areas. Now, if he struggles again against Baltimore and struggles against the Giants, and we're at like a month here of him looking bad, we're going to have different conversations than we're having right now. But right now, with how everything's going, that was a weird game against the Saints with the slippery ball and Drew Dahlman and the center exchange issues. I'm not worried about it right now. We just need to see some growth. And I think we're going to see it over the next couple games. The defenses aren't quite as good. Hopefully the weather's a little better, and we'll see some different play from Caleb Williams. Progress is never linear. Growth is not linear, so Caleb Williams is going to have ups and downs. I expect us to see an up again soon. Jermaine Jones, how do the Bears get Loveland more a part of the offense? Well, I'll be honest, the Bears are an 11 personnel a lot against the Saints. Colston, Loveland, like right now, here's the thing with tight ends. And I know we're seeing Tyler Warren having a good season as a rookie. We're seeing Harold Fannin having a good season as a rookie. A lot of times tight ends take a couple years to really figure things out. And Colston Loveland is young. He is a young rookie. So with that in mind, especially with the injury that he had and didn't get to practice in full for a lot of the offseason, I'm not worried about Colston Loveland at this point. He may not have a big role in this offense all season. I know we expected it. I know we expected the Bears to live in 12 personnel. But right now, and I think it's frustrating some Bears fans, I think Ben Johnson, after you get through the top two receivers, the DJ and Rome, Olamide Zaccheaus is who he trusts third, more than Kmet and more than Loveland. So, and more than Burden for whatever reason, whether it's playbook, whether it's how they play on the field, whatever it might be. But right now, Zaccheaus is getting the most snaps. And we're seeing that slowly tick down for him. But it may take a while. So for Loveland, I think it's just patience right now. It's not a very specific, they need to do this or they need to do that. There just needs to be patience, and Loveland just needs to get more comfortable playing in Ben Johnson's offense at the NFL level. What else do we have? We've got more Crosby. David Glenn, it must have been a fire ant they were trying to squish in the last minute of that first half. My comment was the Bears squished the Saints like an ant, as I give my little hints in terms of who the guest is going to be. Aunt Herron, of course, was our guest this week. Yeah, that was not great, and that was a definite lapse there. Again, that end of that drive half was mostly the Tyreek Stevenson, whatever that was. That was a 40, 50 yard. That was more than half the yards. In fact, but here's what I would say, because I saw this. Spencer Rattler threw for whatever it was, like 240 yards, right? Like 150 of those yards were on those two drives. The rest of the time, he threw for like 75 yards. That's how good this defense was. So yes, we saw those mental lapses on those two drives back-to-back around halftime. But other than that, the defense was so good. I'm not going to sit there and criticize the defense. All right, let's wrap it up with prediction. I'm going to give you two predictions. I'm going to give you the Lamar and the no Lamar prediction because it's that big of a significant impact to this game. If Lamar Jackson plays, I do think the Bears are going to lose, but I think the Bears are going to keep this close. Either way, I think this game is fairly close. I think it's within a touchdown either way. If Lamar plays, I'm going to say this one ends up being like 24-20 Baltimore. If Lamar does not play, I think the Bears can win this one like 27-20, something like that. If Lamar doesn't play, there is a chance that this could get out of hand and the Bears could whip up on the Ravens pretty good because Cooper Rush does not look good. The Ravens are definitely a hot mess, but we all know the Ravens are better than their 1-5 record. No one's going to sit there and pretend they think the Ravens are one of the worst teams in the NFL. So overall for me, I think if Lamar plays, the Bears do end up on the wrong side, but it's a field goal game. It's close. And when the game's close in the fourth quarter in the regular season, you got to take Lamar Jackson. If he's not in there, obviously that changes everything. The Bears at that point have the better quarterback. You could argue at this point the Bears have the better coach. So that's right. I said what I said. All right. That's going to do it for Bears Banter. We'll talk to you next week. Bear down, everybody. Talk to you then. Adios.